Welcome to KopiTalk, an NTU podcast centered around the most relevant and pressing education topics. And today, we have a very special guest. So if you could do us the honors of maybe introducing yourself and telling our viewers why they should listen into the conversation that we're having in right now.
Oh, well, my name is Barb Oakley. I grew up terrible at math, and now I'm a distinguished professor of engineering. So you might want to listen just to find out how much more you can do than you might think you can do.
Right. And I think there's so much to unpack there, but I have to start as a Singaporean asking you, how's Singapore been for you the past couple of days?
I love Singapore. And part of it, there's so many reasons. Even though it's small, it's mighty. And people here are really, they're interested in learning and in making the changes that we need to make in light of the fact that ChatGPT is out here and it's changing everything we know about how we learn effectively. Many places I go around the world, it's kind of like, we don't care. We don't have to. We're big, and so we know everything. But the reality is they need to change, and they need to be open to changes. And Singapore is really open and perceptive about the need for change.
Right, because I've been listening to some of your talks, and both physically and ideologically, you've been everywhere. You started off in the military, and then you worked on Soviet trawls, and went to Antarctica, and you sort of right now understanding deeply the subject of the science of learning. So I wanted to ask, what made you sort of settle on that as something that you really wanted to profoundly understand?
So for me, my background is in many different areas, but also ultimately culminating in a PhD in engineering, and really that helps me to understand what the research in various fields is saying. And so I've become dedicated really to helping to show people from a neuroscientific perspective and from a solid research-based perspective, how do they really learn? And what is wrong with the current methods that actually can be crippling so many people's ability to learn? And what's really important is that with the advent of generative AI, these improper, stumbling block approaches to education actually could get even worse if we don't rectify things. In other words, people could really go downhill in their ability to learn and their cognition if we don't shift our approach to teaching so that people really can learn more effectively. And there's so much information out there about how we effectively learn, but often this is cut off from, for example, schools of education who are locked into approaches from 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago that have no insight from modern neuroscience about how we learn.
I think on that topic, I wanted to ask you something that personally interests me a lot. And it's the idea of, on extracurricular studies, this idea of tuition and tuition centers. So in Singapore, attending a tuition center, especially I would say up till middle school level of studies, is quite common, and it's something that you see in Asian countries as well, in Korea with Hagwon culture. But from my understanding, in the US or in the West, it's almost you almost never see that. So what do you make of this difference in culture when it comes to tuition and studies and study centers outside of school?
I think because the population is more dense in Asian countries, there's more competition. But at the same time, there's a cultural respect and awareness of the vital importance of education. So this means that parents kind of figure out what is really going to be supportive of their child in education. And I believe that traditionally, old-fashioned ways of learning with lots of repetition and practice, I mean, neuroscience is showing that it actually works. Now, of course, there are ways to enhance nowadays so that you can, too much rote practice in a way that is very narrow and doesn't kind of build out your thinking can indeed make you really good at very carefully constrained problems. But I think that, for example, in the U.S., you will often see people of Asian origin. Like I would go in, I'd be the only mom sitting in there who was, not someone coming from Asia or from India or from the Middle East. But I knew, just like they knew, that this practice is going to be invaluable for our children's future. So JUCO kinds of cram schools, the shame of it or the sadness of it is that parents who have more money are able to give these kinds of experiences to their children. So I think in a perfect world, some of that JUCO-like practice would be, instead of after school, be incorporated in school. And I do believe that there's going to be ways that it can be gamified even further. So it's really kind of fun stuff. And, because practice and repetition is really the bane of the existence of students. It works, it helps you, but it's really boring. So if we can get it incorporated into schools using some of these new gamified techniques, I think students will really benefit. But as it is, Asian parents they're really intelligent to do some of this extra practice and so forth. I just, if there was a way to also be, giving more free time as well.
Right.
So, not too many extra outside activities.
Give the child more time to be a child and to experience childhood.
Bingo.
Right. But I do want to slightly change tracks here as well. You've been on this huge journey and now you've arrived in Singapore. So looking at the Singaporean education system, what's like the one thing that stands out to you the most?
I think in Singapore, more than anywhere else, I see a sort of a willingness to dabble in what does the science actually say. I think everybody wants to have students who are really perceptive and really cognitively sharp coming out of the systems. I would say perhaps one way to enhance even further would be to use a bit more Socratic questioning, and I think it is being used in some aspects. But what I mean here is when students are trying to figure something out, there is an extraordinarily high number of neural dimensions that students, like neural tracks that they could follow in order to try to figure a problem out. There's 100 trillion connections in the brain. So what this means is that students can sit down, try to solve a problem, and there's so many ways to go that it's really hard for them to get that aha moment and put something together without some broad hints about where they should go. And sometimes those broad hints can result in just memorize the algorithm, right? So you memorize the algorithm, but you don't have practice in sort of seeing and conceptualizing what that algorithm really means. And there are ways of teaching that can help you, like ask you questions, help you visualize, and allow you to put things together ultimately. But it's not such a difficult problem that it's really hard for you to search out the solution in the solution space. So I just think adding a little bit more of Socratic questioning, if that's possible, could help enhance the students' practice in searching out solutions rather than memorizing solutions. And that could perhaps further enhance their creativity.
I think definitely something that I've experienced personally, and it's been a while because I think, secondary school has been a long time for me, not to out my age, but there is a very heavy emphasis on the idea of the format, the model answer in schools. Whenever there's an exam or there's a test, there's an assignment, the most important thing that students ask for is, what is the rubric? How am I being graded? Or I would say, to take it to even a step further, what is the model essay? Do you think that this is something that perhaps we need to start moving beyond?
Yes, and I think there's ways to look specifically at certain things, how they're taught, and kind of back away just a little bit and provide newer materials that help students to take a step back and not get directly there when they're first learning about important algorithms and so forth. Of course, you can't do this with everything because then you'll slow progress down. But what is going on in their neural space is every time you are asking them a question, they're searching. There's this little hidden Markov search pattern going on in their brain. They're getting practice. Whereas if they were just memorizing, none of that searching would be taking place, and none of the enhancement of creative search processes would be taking place.
So the last big topic, so the elephant in the room, is talking about Gen AI. So I think where we like to start off is with how prevalent Gen AI and ChatGPT is becoming. How would you suggest for people to integrate Gen AI into their studying, especially without sort of hindering their own innate ability to learn?
It is so tempting and seductive to just get Gen AI to answer all the questions for you and do everything for you. And that way lies real danger. I mean, it's going to come back and bite you on the job. You want to acquire some kind of expertise. I use AI to help me sometimes come up with creative new ideas. So then I said, well, okay, well, here's my paper. Can you see any new way to look at what's going on here by combining the ideas from my work in neuroscience? And it came back and said, yeah, actually, you could put this on a much more solid neuroscientific foundation, what had originally been presented in those first 3 papers, and that would really be novel. And I didn't think about doing that. It was really kind of helpful and sort of cool. But the thing is, I know what's in that neuroscience paper. I wrote that paper. I know every aspect of that paper. I knew what to, when I would put it paragraph by paragraph into ChatGPT, I would ask, how can I make this as elegant yet simple and non-turgid, non-academic prose? And I worked through that 50-page paper for weeks to get it really, and I know what's in that paper. So I have a deep expertise, but then I could use ChatGPT to help go into this new area where I know nothing about it.
So would you say that the key of it is to come from a place of capability when you can use it as a tool, but to be very careful to use it as a substitute when procuring skill?
You better make sure you've got the skill in the first place. And you better make sure that you've got facts and knowledge in your brain in the first place.
Shortly, what's a piece of advice you'd give to educators and then a piece of advice you'd give to students?
For educators in Singapore, I would recommend that you look up something called Research Ed. And that is an organization that tries to use evidence-based approaches and to teach about evidence-based approaches. I can't help but recommend my own book, Uncommon Sense Teaching, with my colleagues Terry Sanowski and Beth Rogowski. It really gives you practically useful insight into what you need to do to teach effectively in light of how our brain actually learns. Also, we have courses on Coursera. There's a 3-part course on Uncommon Sense Teaching. And, of course, there's our old standby Learning How to Learn that has a lot of information, and that's particularly valuable for students. If you look way down on the page, there is actually a link that you can get into it for free. So you have to kind of go down on the page and they'll say partner supported something or other. And then you can get into the course and it's all free. And it will teach you about time management, a Pomodoro technique, also retrieval practice, spaced repetition, and we're just refurbishing everything with the latest of AI technology. So it's really cool looking.
I think on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for your time here today. And for you guys watching, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you see, don't forget to drop a subscribe. And if you want more content about learning and the science of learning, make sure to check out Prof. Barbara or to check out Instagram page.